logging in as we go, but we can get started. I want to thank everybody for joining us for this webinar, and a special thank you to Brandon Burke with the Business Network for Offshore Wind, his VP Policy and Regulatory Engagement, for agreeing to speak to us today. We know you're really busy, especially with IPF less than a month away. So we certainly appreciate you doing that for us. Did provide an update on U.S. offshore wind industry and what's been going on. Lots has been changing over the last weeks, let alone months. So it'll be good to hear all the recent developments. So this webinar, primarily, we're hosting it to help prepare some of the companies, or all of the companies that are participating in our mission to IPF, which is taking place the end of April in Atlantic City. Long overdue. We've been trying to get down there for 2 years now, so we're certainly really excited that we're finally able to do that, and we're leading a fairly large mission down to IPF. But we knew that there'd be other companies, members of ours and Canadian companies, that would be interested in hearing what Brandon had to say. So we've opened this up to everybody. Brandon will give his presentation here in a minute, and then we will have some time for some questions and answers after that. Please use the chat or Q&A function, and I can moderate as I see them coming through. And then at the very end, I'm going to take a few minutes to actually review some of our mission details for the companies that are attending IPF with us. Just go over some of the logistics, the booth, things like that. So for those companies that aren't participating in the mission, you're certainly, feel free to log off. If you want to listen to what I have to say about the mission, feel free as well. I just wanted to give you the heads up that the last 5 to 10 minutes max will be pretty much focused on the mission itself. So with that, I am going to hand it over to Brandon.
Great, thanks, Amanda. Can you hear me? Okay, I see you nodding there. Wonderful. So as Amanda mentioned, I'm Brandon Burke. I'm the Vice President for Policy and Regulatory Engagement with the Business Network for Offshore Wind here in the United States. The network is based in Baltimore, Maryland. I'm in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, but we have employees all over the country, from Maine down the East Coast, and including several in California at this point. Really appreciate the opportunity to speak, and I'd like to thank Marine Renewables Canada for inviting me to present today. We're looking forward to seeing all of you, or at least many of you, in Atlantic City, New Jersey. And I'm from New Jersey, so it will be very nice to welcome you to my state of origin. So real quick, before we dive into the U.S. offshore wind market, I'd just like to start with a quick introduction to the Business Network for Offshore Wind and our overall impact. We are a nonprofit educational organization. We're focused on developing the offshore wind industry, and our principal mission is growing the offshore wind supply chain here in the United States. We are a membership-focused organization, and we do have over 400 members at this point, but we only focus on offshore wind. We do not focus on any other energy technologies. And as I said, our principal mission is growing the offshore wind supply chain. And we are a supply chain focused company, and this circle and its subdivisions really represent the entire life cycle of an offshore wind facility. And we have member companies who do all of this work, from the pre-installation surveys, design work, government and stakeholder engagement work, all the way to fabrication, construction, installation, operations and maintenance, and of course, at the end of life, the decommissioning. But part of what we do is map the supply chain around the United States. And obviously you can see there are some Canadian companies here on this map. And this map is sourced from one of the network's key products that I will talk about a little bit later, but that product is called Supply Chain Connect. And here you'll see locations of companies who have identified themselves as able to participate in the offshore wind supply chain. And the network maintains offshore wind Supply Chain Connect on a national basis, but we also serve as the back end for a number of other state government specific registries for states that have decided to create their own offshore wind supply chain registries. And some of those states include New Jersey, Maryland, Maine, Oregon, and some others. But as you can see here, we're really primarily seeing the development of supply chain activity along the East Coast, which makes sense. That's primarily where activity has taken place over the past several years. But more recently, we're starting to see some more activity in the Gulf of Mexico, as well as in the West Coast. This is what Supply Chain Connect looks like for companies that are registering. We have over 500 products and services that, again, represent the entire life cycle of an offshore wind facility. And we invite companies like yourselves, it's free to register. We invite companies like yourselves to register and publicly indicate your ability to supply components or services for US offshore wind projects. So I certainly encourage yourselves or your firms to participate in Supply Chain Connect so that you can indicate your ability to meet these needs, which our members, which include all of the principal US offshore wind developers, they look at this product in order to connect with companies that can serve these various competencies. So certainly encourage you to check that out, and you can go find that at our website, which is offshorewindus.org. So just a quick overview of the US offshore wind structure. The key takeaways here, remember that state governments are responsible for offtake, in other words, your power contract. The federal government here in the United States is principally responsible for awarding site control, which is the leasing, and approving the permitting side for the project's construction and operations plans, or COPs. And we'll touch on that in just a moment, but really kind of looking at this a little bit more closely, the states create demand for electricity from offshore wind facilities. Here in the United States, states determine their electric generation mixes on a state-by-state level. And states create demand for offshore wind by setting technology-specific capacity procurement targets. So we'll talk about those targets in just a moment, but to reach those targets, state governments conduct offshore wind capacity solicitations, they evaluate the bids that are received, and they select the winning bidders and award those projects, award those megawatts. But keep in mind that these criterion for these different states vary significantly on a state-by-state basis. But one thing is really certain here in the United States, state government political will is absolutely essential to offshore wind success because, like I said just a moment ago, it's the states that are making the generation decisions, the technologies that will serve electricity to the end users within their state boundaries. Now, on the federal side, you have the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management and the Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement, or BSEE. BOEM delineates the offshore wind lease areas, and they conduct the auctions of lease areas, just like the New York Bight auction, which took place about a month ago. And we'll talk about that in a moment. But in addition to that site control, the federal government does the permitting approvals, the site assessment plans, the construction and operations plans. One thing that is unique very recently under the Biden administration is the first federal government goal for deploying offshore wind in US waters, that is to deploy 30 gigawatts of offshore wind capacity in US waters by 2030. That is part of the Biden administration's initiative on offshore wind, and it really has been a key aspect of kickstarting the offshore wind industry under the Biden administration. Then, of course, you have private developers and lessees who acquire those sites from the federal governments, and then they prevail in those state government capacity solicitations. And of course, you have other stakeholders, including ocean users like commercial fishing, navigation, the Department of Defense, et cetera. But as I mentioned, we were talking about offshore wind targets, and that's one of the key roles that the state governments play in defining that demand for offshore wind, which is to say, creating, again, these technology-specific capacity procurement targets. Some of them are created by legislation, some of them are created by executive order, others are created by orders or decrees of the Public Utility or Public Service Commissions. But ultimately, when you look at this slide here, what it represents is that US state government targets taken together now total just about 40 gigawatts by 2040. So you compare that 40 gigawatts by 2040 by state governments, compare that to the federal goal of 30 gigawatts deployed by 2030. So you have sort of two different levels of goals. The federal government goal is a bit more aspirational because, again, it is the state governments that are actually making those generation decisions. But where the federal government really has significant power in offshore wind is the leasing schedule, which you'll see here on your screen. This schedule, which was released just in October of last year, it shows BOEM's planned offshore wind leasing schedule out to 2025. And you'll see from these various colored dots on both coasts that BOEM is planning to conduct offshore wind leasing in essentially all US waters. So we'll touch on the New York Bight in just a moment, which is that yellow dot in the Northeast that you'll see there. But if you look further to the south, the purple dot, Carolina Long Bay, the final sale notice, or FSN, was just released last week. And this auction, which is the next offshore wind lease auction in federal waters, that will be taking place on May 11th. So very soon, coming up on our next offshore wind lease sale. Then looking to the west later in the year, this orange line, as well as the orange dot off of the California coast, you'll see that there's planned leasing for in the third quarter of 2022 in Northern and Central California. Northern California is the Humboldt wind energy area. Central California is Morro Bay. Then looking towards later in the year, just towards the end of 2022, the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management intends to conduct a lease sale in the Gulf of Mexico. And then beyond that, looking more to the southeast or central Atlantic, which is between the New York Bight and Carolina Long Bay. Later next year, in 2023, Oregon coming down the pike, and then, of course, the Gulf of Maine a bit farther out, but that is something that is continuing to develop. But let's take a look at the New York Bight, which was the most recent lease sale that was just conducted by BOEM in late February of this year. I'm sure many of you have heard about this, especially if you're monitoring the US offshore wind industry. It is the first offshore wind lease sale in US federal waters since 2018. Over 488,000 acres within the New York Bight were auctioned, and the combined 6 areas that you see here on your screen have an estimated total capacity somewhere between about 5.5 gigawatts to 7 gigawatts. So that increases the US potential offshore wind capacity by about 30%, which is really remarkable. And of course, the big number that many folks have probably heard about $4.37 billion in total revenue was generated from these auctions of the 6 individual lease areas. I'm sure that you can understand that that represents fierce competition among the bidders to secure these lease areas. And many have asked, why is that competition so fierce? Well, of course, we have the Biden administration who has really pushed things forward recently with the industry, but also because New York and New Jersey together, those state goals that I was just talking about, those state goals taken together, New York and New Jersey represent the largest combined offshore wind market in the United States, 16.5 gigawatts just between 2 neighboring states. Now let's take another look at the winners of the most recent US offshore wind lease auction in the New York Bight. You'll see a number of new market participants. For example, ENBW, who has reformulated itself as Attentive Energy there for OCSA 538, sort of farthest out to the east. You can also see RWE, who has been monitoring the offshore wind market here in the US for a number of years, but this is their first lease that they've been able to secure. And then, of course, you see there Blackstone, which is an investment bank. So that is certainly interesting to see the level of interest and participation that this lease sale has generated. But let's just zoom out for a little bit and take a look at a snapshot of the overall state of the US offshore wind market. Right now, we have 2 operational pilot projects. One is the Block Island Wind Farm, which is a 30 megawatt 5-turbine array that is off of Block Island in state waters. So that is part of the state of Rhode Island. That's 30 megawatts. And then down in Virginia, you'll see number 20 on this map here. You have the Coastal Virginia Offshore Wind Project, or CVOW. There is a 2-turbine pilot project that's 12 megawatts. That is the first operating offshore wind turbines in federal waters. And it's right next to number 19, which is the commercial CVOW project, which right now, as planned, is one of the largest offshore wind projects that is being proposed on the planet. It is a fixed bottom project. But as we move to beyond sort of the pilot project phase into the full-scale commercial phase, on the federal permitting front, we have 2 projects with approved construction and operations plans, or COPs. Both of these projects have achieved financial close, and they're now under construction, which is unprecedented in U.S. waters. And those are Vineyard Wind, which is up there south of Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket. And then South Fork Wind, which is about 25 miles or 30 miles east of Montauk Point, the end of Long Island. So 2 projects currently under construction at utility scale, or over 100 megawatts. And we have a number of projects right behind them in the federal permitting process. We have 9 projects with construction and operations plans that are undergoing environmental and technical review at the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. And just behind that, we have 6 more projects which have had their site assessment plans approved, and we're waiting on them to submit their construction and operations plans to BOEM so that they can enter the queue for that final environmental review. Now, in addition to Carolina Long Bay, which I mentioned earlier, you'll see represented here in bullet 22, we also have, as I mentioned before, several wind energy areas in development in other parts of the country, which includes the West Coast. You see there 23 and 24 are Northern and Central California, and also in the Gulf of Mexico, which the federal government intends to do some leasing there by the end of this year. So here's a look at the area that is currently undergoing an environmental assessment process, which is how they delineate the areas which will be leased, or will they winnow it down from the environmental assessment through that process to determine the wind energy area. And then within the wind energy area, the individual lease areas will be delineated. You see we have east and western planning areas. The completion of the EA process is expected for this summer, 2022. And just recently, BOEM conducted its second Intergovernmental Renewable Energy Task Force meeting for the Gulf of Mexico, which was in February. And as I've mentioned, BOEM is planning to conduct leasing in the Gulf of Mexico during the 4th quarter of 2022. So very much looking forward to that. And it's a new region that is being opened to offshore wind development here in the United States. Now, as opposed to those targets that we just saw a few slides ago, and just as a reminder, those collective state targets are approximately 40 gigawatts by 2040. The federal goal is 30 gigawatts by 2030. So as opposed to those targets, here on this slide, you'll see the megawatts of offshore wind projects that have firm offtake pathways. In other words, they've secured a power contract, whether that's a PPA, a power purchase agreement, or ORECs, offshore wind renewable energy credits. And right now here in the United States, that amount totals about 17.5 gigawatts. And what's really incredible is that 8 projects representing about 8.5 gigawatts were procured during 2021 alone. So the US started 2021 around 9.1 gigawatts with firm offtake pathways, plus those 8.4 gigawatts procured between January and December of 2021, which brings us up to our current total here of about 17,500 megawatts, or 17.5 gigawatts. Now, obviously, offshore wind, a key part of that puzzle is ports, and we're already seeing the distribution of ports along the East Coast, including significant manufacturing facility commitments. You look at number 11 and 13, the New Jersey Wind Port and Ørsted /EEW monopile manufacturing facilities. So a lot of action happening in New Jersey. Right there, number 12, also in New Jersey, in the backyard of where we will be at IPF. There is an O&M facility planned for Atlantic City. You look up to New York and you see the South Brooklyn Marine Terminal, which is focused on both staging and assembly. What's really interesting is if you look at bullets or bubbles 1 and 19, the ports of Coeymans and Albany, both of which are going to be involved in manufacturing. Those are 100 miles up the Hudson River inland from the ocean. So it shows how distributed the benefits and economic participation in the offshore wind industry are. It's not only coastal areas. You also have Trade Point Atlantic in Baltimore, where they're going to be do foundation fabrication, excuse me. And also there is Siemens Gamesa has proposed a blade factory in the Hampton Roads area of Virginia, which you will see number 15 there. Now, these ports are emerging as the key hubs of the U.S. offshore wind industry. And to look at where the distribution of the component manufacturing is taking place, they are these hubs because, as many of you on this call know, the ports really are where much of, if not all of the principal offshore wind turbine components are manufactured. Of course, we're seeing a lot of shipbuilding in the Gulf of Mexico region. The first wind turbine installation vessel that is being financed by Dominion and a consortium of other investors is being constructed in the Gulf of Mexico right now, as well as many other components, including cables, and actually the substation for the South Fork Wind Project is being constructed there in Texas, as you'll see towards the center of your screen. But of course, there's really a lot of activity in the Northeast and in the Mid-Atlantic, and that in large part is directly an outcome of the policy and procurement decisions that those states have made as they stood up their offshore wind programs through that legislation or executive orders that I was talking about before. But regardless of the mechanism by which they did those policy establishment decisions, they have been specifically focused on local manufacturing and supply chain participation. So that is really what is a major driving factor of where these facilities end up being sited. Now, to quickly look at the distribution of supplier contracts, here you'll see a regional breakdown of the companies that have been awarded projects or contracts in the U.S. offshore wind industry. And these are companies that have provided a U.S. location in the Network Supply Chain Connect registry that I was talking about earlier in the presentation. Again, here you'll see much of this activity is focused in New England, the Mid-Atlantic, and mostly on the East Coast, but there is significant participation in the Gulf of Mexico region and elsewhere. Now, of course, global markets beyond the United States are focusing increasing amounts of attention on the potential of floating offshore wind. And this is particularly an important technology in terms of getting to those total decarbonization targets out to 2050. And really for these reasons, as you can see here on this slide, the US opportunity in floating offshore wind really is national. And as you see here, all the regions where the network believes that floating offshore wind projects will likely be deployed, and that runs the gamut from the Northeast all the way down through the East Coast to the Gulf of Mexico and out to the West. In the Gulf of Maine, the Aquaventus project is furthest along in terms of deploying a full-scale floating offshore wind turbine. That project will be in state waters and will be a single 11 megawatt turbine that is deployed off about 2.5 miles off Monhegan Island in Maine. But really, the primary focus for floating offshore wind, as many of you probably know, is California and Oregon. And just a quick update on what's going on there in California, the AB 525 legislation, which was passed last year, that is California's first offshore wind focused legislation, and it fits into California's larger clean energy framework, which is set forth in legislation called SB 100. Now, the California Energy Commission, or CEC, is due to establish offshore wind megawatt planning goals for both 2030 and 2045 by June 1st of this year. So that deadline is barreling down. And by June 30th, 2023, so next year, a final strategic plan is due to the California Natural Resources Agency, but we can expect a draft strategic plan for public review and comment before then. The CEC also recently approved $10.5 million grant for renovations to the Port of Humboldt Bay in Northern California to support offshore wind activities. And this also aligns with a recent approved plan by the California grid operator, the CalISO, for a transmission plan that considers how to integrate significant offshore wind injections from Northern California specifically. And in addition, there's 2 floating pilot projects that are being considered for state waters off of Lompoc, which is south of Morro Bay, right outside the Vandenberg Space Force Base. Moving a little bit north to Oregon, Oregon's Department of Energy, or ODO, is in the midst of conducting a floating offshore wind study pursuant to some legislation that was passed last year. The second public meeting focused on that study is coming up on April 7th, and a report regarding the potential and opportunities associated with floating offshore wind is due to the Oregon legislature by mid-September of this year. And can't forget Hawaii. Their state Senate recently passed a bill focused on offshore wind, so that is now headed for the state House of Representatives. So we're monitoring that very closely. One more topic that is really, talked about much in the U.S. offshore wind market and elsewhere in international offshore wind markets is the transmission question. And the New Jersey Board of Public Utilities and grid operator PJM, they announced in 2020 that they're conducting a solicitation of bids for transmission-only projects to integrate offshore wind generation. This is key, really, because it is a step towards holistically planning how to upgrade the PJM grid within the state of New Jersey to accommodate New Jersey's 7,500 megawatt offshore wind target. Now, compare that to the status quo, which is individual generator lead line construction. In other words, a project by project approach, which has limitations and can leave efficiencies on the table. And also by utilizing a an integrated approach, you can reduce the number of beach crossings that are necessary to integrate all of these megawatts into the onshore grid. And this process is proceeding. There's actually a webinar going on for that right now, conducted by the New Jersey Board of Public Utilities. And there's several more coming up, so I encourage you to look into that and check them out. But really, the process is considering 3 aspects of the transmission system. There's upgrading the PJM transmission system to reach substations closer to the coast, which is the green that you'll see here. The second aspect of the system is the yellow, which is optimizing or reducing those beach crossings by using offshore or wet collector stations. And then finally, a more advanced aspect of the system would be this blue line that runs north to south, a potential north-south backbone or offshore grid configuration that would allow power to be rerouted north and south offshore. Now, a lot of other states are watching New Jersey very carefully, and just recently, Massachusetts passed legislation focused on an integrated transmission system designed to incorporate over 2,000 megawatts of offshore wind, definitely taking hints from New Jersey in terms of how they should be proceeding. And there's ample evidence from overseas markets. We won't dive into that now, but a planned approach, particularly in the United Kingdom, as well as Germany and some of the other more advanced European offshore wind markets, they have encountered challenges as they get to that 8-10 gigawatts deployed. How do they integrate all of those megawatts into the onshore grid? It's necessary for long-term success because you may simply run out of places to plug these projects into onshore. Now, a quick note on IPF. Obviously, Amanda will be touching on this in more depth in a few moments. But the IPF, or International Offshore Wind Partnering Forum, is the network signature event. It's one of the top 5 global offshore wind events. We're looking to the upcoming IPF in Atlantic City in New Jersey on April 26th, 27th, and 28th. In terms of how to prepare for IPF, be sure to go check out the IPF website and register for WindMatch. WindMatch is a networking service that provides attendees with the opportunity to meet one-on-one with the decision makers from top offshore wind companies across the globe. And just speaking anecdotally, I know there is a lot of business that comes out of those meetings, so certainly put that at the top of your to-do as you're preparing for IPF. I also recommend that you take a look at the IPF website for the conference schedule and agenda, as well as reviewing the exhibitor list so that you're really maximizing your opportunity in Atlantic City. And of course, I would be remiss if I did not mention all the informal networking opportunities and receptions during the evenings, which are really enjoyable, and a lot of informal conversations lead, as many of you know, to business opportunities. So we certainly encourage you to participate there. And if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to reach out and let us know. Just a quick touch on a couple of other products that the network has. We offer a number of specialized education and training programs designed to help companies that are interested in offshore wind, number one, better understand the industry, and number two, help identify where they fit into the offshore wind supply chain and how they can successfully participate. Our flagship education program is Foundation to Blade, and that's a full supply chain training course. And we have partnered with a number of state governments, including New Jersey, to deliver this training to companies within those states. We also have some other educational offerings of different lengths, which you'll see here, Offshore Wind 101, as well as Offshore Wind Ready. And now, if you want to learn more about these, you'll see at the bottom of your screen the link there, offshorewindus.org/OSW training. You can learn more about each of these different product and educational offerings there, and I certainly encourage you to do that. Now, in addition to IPF, we have our Ventus Awards, which we did our inaugural iteration of that this past November, and it was a great success. I mentioned our industry training and education products, but on the far right, you'll see the network also has a podcast called Offshore Wind Insider that's available on Spotify and Apple Podcasts and other platforms, including the network's website, offshorewindus.org. And the podcast has been downloaded over 42,000 times. So that's something we're really proud of. We have listeners on 6 continents, and you can rest assured that we're working on getting into the Antarctica market. And then finally, the Offshore Wind Market Dashboard. It's a one-stop portal for everything that's going on in the U.S. offshore wind industry, both on the market side and on the policy side. And that includes supplier contracts, project specifications, contractor details, ports, vessels, legislation, reports, articles, and more. And with that, I will turn it back over to Amanda, and happy to take any questions that you might have.
Thank you so much, Brandon. And I will say, if anybody has any questions on what Brandon has mentioned specifically about what the Business Network for Offshore Wind offers, you can certainly reach out to me or us as well too, and I can point you in the right direction. They have some really awesome products and services that they offer around U.S. offshore wind, for sure. I do see one question here, Brandon. The gentleman is asking if there's a visual for the queue and where the various projects stand in maturity. I'm thinking that's something they may find on your dashboard.
Yes, exactly correct. That is a part of dashboard, and that's something that we, update on a granular basis. It is an increasing heavy lift, but it is something that's important, and we really do document the projects moving forward granularly through each step in the process, both at the state level in terms of that offtake, as well as at the federal level where they stand in the permitting approval. So Ken would certainly be interested to connect and discuss further if you'd like to know more about the market dashboard.
Yeah, I've looked at it and wondered how you managed to keep that updated. I mean, that's a full-time job for probably a few people, I would think. I do have a quick question. Do you have to be a member to have access to that dashboard? I know there's a cost, but can you be a non-member, pay a separate cost, or do you have to be a member to do it?
Yeah, the market dashboard, there's one login that is conferred to each leadership level member. And there are additional logins that are available for a separate fee. But yes, you do need to be a member to get that dashboard, which is a market intelligence tool. So it is important, as you mentioned, that we keep it updated. It does require resources. So that is why we have that as a benefit for members. However, the Supply Chain Connect, that is open to non-members. So certainly, if that is not in your budget, if being a member is not in your budget right now, certainly still recommend you sign up for Supply Chain Connect so that you can identify the competencies and products that you can provide to the offshore wind market.
Perfect. Thank you. Another question here. On the map of supply chain, it appeared that there was a dot in Canada in St. John, New Brunswick. You did mention there were some Canadian companies up in there that are part of this already.
Yes, and I could certainly look back at this Supply Chain Connect with the team and get a better readout of who that is. I don't know who that specifically is right now off the top of my head, though. But yeah, we have that information. And, if you aren't already registered, certainly encourage you to register and get your dot on this map.
Mm-hmm. Especially it's free and non-members can participate. So yeah, that's sort of a no-brainer. Okay, any other questions before I flip over to talk about some mission stuff? I don't see anything there, but I will let anybody know if you think of some questions or you want to reach out afterwards, certainly do so, and I can maybe forward your question off to Brandon. I will also, Brandon's agreed to provide his slides in a PDF format so that I'll be able to send those out. We are recording this as well too, and again, Brandon graciously agreed to allow us to record this. So hopefully, as long as all the technology works right, I'll get it exported and be able to send a link out to everybody as well too, with the full recording of the webinar. I don't see any other questions, so thank you so much, Brandon. Really appreciate it. And I and the rest of our companies are very much looking forward to being there in less than a month. And I'm sure we'll run into you while we're there as well too. So thank you again for doing this.
Lillian, thank you for having me.
Okay. All right, I'm going to share my screen now and go over a few points regarding our mission. Okay, so hopefully everybody can see that okay. So as I mentioned, the mission's coming up April 26th to 28th in Atlantic City in New Jersey. Long overdue. Again, we've tried to get to this event twice now. So third time's a charm. We do have a full house. We have quite a few companies, more than we expected, but are thrilled that we have so many attending. This is just a quick list of the companies that are going to be participating in our mission. And so I'm just going to go over a few of the logistics and details. We are looking at having a pre-mission breakfast briefing in country. So when we're in Atlantic City, most people are going to be traveling in there on Monday, the 25th. Pretty much everything starts on Tuesday, the 26th. So we'd like sort of kick off that day with a pre-mission breakfast briefing, probably around 8 to 9:30. I still have to confirm where that's going to be, but it just gives an opportunity for all of us to meet each other. Believe it or not, not everyone, all of the companies that are attending actually have met each other before. I can provide some last minute updates on the mission details and logistics. We are going to invite some of the local or regional Canadian trade commissioners that are there to join us as well for a bit of informal networking. And just some general discussion and networking, of course, will provide a light breakfast as well. I won't go through all of this because, as Brandon said, the best way is to go to the IPF website and actually have a look at the daily agenda or the program. It's full. There is a lot going on. So I've quickly sort of pulled out each of the 3 days and highlighted a few things that there's lots of sort of workshops and meetings going on, but I've highlighted when registration opens, when Win Match starts, when the exhibit hall opens, and then everything in yellow here is all the networking opportunities. And Brandon mentioned this, but there is a ton of networking opportunities during IPF. And it would be great to be able to take in all of them. They start, immediately after sort of the sessions end and go late into the evening. So I've highlighted all of these here just so that you can have a quick look. This is Wednesday, April 27th. Again, there's networking luncheons, there's breakfasts, there's coffee breaks, and then in the evenings, there's usually multiple networking receptions. So there's certainly not going to be short of things to do while we're there. April 26th, Thursday, April 28th, the last day of the conference. Again, still a lot going on as far as networking opportunities. So it's going to be a busy couple of days, but I think very much worthwhile. This is a quick snapshot of our booth space. So we do have 3 10x10 booths basically lined up, 10x30 space. It's not large for the amount of companies that we actually have with us. So the booth is really meant to be sort of maybe a home base. It's not an area that each company is able to have their own dedicated space. It just isn't big enough. And this trade show, I know their exhibition sold out quite quickly, so it's very full. The booth itself will be branded. It'll just have some MRC banners. We'll have a main counter. We'll have literature racks for all of the companies to display your brochures. As mentioned, we are creating a booklet that's going to have all of the companies' profiles in it that we'll also have at the booth so that visitors can take it and see who's there with us. And we're going to have a TV or a flat screen on a stand that will be rolling all the company's presentations that you guys will be submitting here in a little bit. So even though it's a small booth, we do have some space for chairs, tables and chairs. So I think we have 4 tables and chairs for seating so that you can sit and have a meeting, or, you know, if somebody stops by and is looking to talk with you, there is some space for you to sit down and chat with them. We also have, well, this is a little picture of what the booklet's going to look like. This is the front cover, but that's going to print here soon. So I will have, I think I'm getting 250 copies of it at the booth with me, so it can be handed out as needed. Along with the booth, we are also going to have a private meeting room. So part of the package that we got with IPF included this private meeting room at the Sheraton Atlantic City Hotel, which is connected to the convention center where the conference is. I just received information on the location of it, so I'll send that out to everybody so that you know where it is. I'm not sure yet, because I've not been there, how far it is actually from the exhibition floor, but I will find that out just so that you're aware if it is a little bit of a walk. I think it's fairly close. I mean, the hotel's connected right to the convention center, but sometimes it can still take a little while to get from one place to another. But it is available for all mission delegates to use for meetings or just some quiet space if you need it. But we will have to have a schedule just to ensure that we don't have folks showing up at the same time or double booking it. But I'll send you more information on that. Brandon mentioned this before. Make sure you sign up for WinMatch. So every one of you are now registered as full conference delegates for IPF. You should have all received a confirmation email with login information. And if you go to the IPF website, there's a whole page on WinMatch. But you do have to register in advance before you can start using it. And once you get to the web page, there is also really clear instructions on how to actually use it. And it is very easy and user-friendly. But I suggest you do get signed up for that. And you'll notice here on the floor plan, they do have a whole section dedicated for WinMatch meeting area. So even though we do have space at our booth and we have that private meeting room, there is a section set aside specifically for folks that are connecting with each other through WinMatch. And I also have here the food and beverage, the networking lounge, and down here is the main entrance. Here is where our booth is. I didn't point that out earlier, but where the dot is, this is the International Pavilion, and that's us. And I think there's the Germans and Holland folks are there. So there's a few of us in that pavilion. Okay, also what you can find on the IPF website, again, I didn't pull it out because it was just way too long for me to put into a PowerPoint, but there is a full list of all the companies that are registered for IPF. So I suggest you take a minute and review all the different companies that are going to be there. Try to identify folks that you may want to connect with, and then do that through WinMatch. And then the final thing I want to mention, I did just email this out this morning. So in preparing for this mission to IPF, we've had conversations with the regional trade commissioners there. And one of the folks we've chatted with is the New Jersey Economic Development Authority. And we decided that it would be a great idea to host a virtual meeting. So it's going to be very informal. It's not a webinar, it'll be a meeting format, but it'll give an opportunity for you guys to introduce yourselves to them so that they know a little bit about the companies. I will send them the booklet so that they can read up all of your profiles beforehand. Then they're going to present a bit on their side from their team that oversees the offshore wind, port projects, strategic sector development, and international trade and investment. So I think it should be an interesting meeting, and it will help, again, prepare you for your visit to Atlantic City in a couple of weeks. And I think that's it. It does look like we have some questions here. David's just asking if I can send around a list of everybody who will be participating in the mission so you all know who will be there with you, and I can certainly do that. I don't think I have done it yet, maybe just the companies, but I will send a list to everyone again so you know who will be there. Again, many of you may not have met each other. And believe it or not, business does happen between the Canadian companies while they're on mission. So I will send that out for sure. And I don't think there's any other questions. I'm going to hit stop share because I can't see if there's questions while I'm doing that. Is there any other questions on mission? Logistics, participation, anything like that? Give me a sec. No? Okay. You can always reach out to me anytime via email or phone if you do have questions leading up to it. Again, I will send the slides as well as the recording of this webinar out to everybody as soon as I get it downloaded and formatted. It may take a day or two to do that, but I will get it out. But again, in the meantime, any questions, just feel free to reach out and I'll be happy to help you or provide some direction to Brandon so that he can answer some questions. Okay, well, I think that's it for us then. I want to thank you again for joining us. I hope you all have a great day. Thanks.